take you on a short journey, a little bit about the book, a little bit about Bombay, a little bit about the original crime, or let's say the unsolved mystery. And I'll be weaving these two together as we go. So here, I'm going to share my screen. Okay. Murder in Old Bombay, right? This is my writing group. Actually, I always start my talks with a thank you, because if it wasn't for them, probably this book wouldn't be the quality, or it wouldn't have gotten the recognition that it has. We met every week for a couple of years, actually, and they went through every single chapter. So without this group, I wouldn't be here, honestly. That's the book. It's been amazing how well it's been received. There is an India edition that's coming out at the end of the month. It's been nominated for an Edgar, and I also heard it's been nominated for a Barry Award. That is something that is given in the Boucher Khan in August. And then there's also something called the Hammett Award for Excellence in Crime Fiction. So really very pleased at how people have received this book. So let's dive into the context a little bit. And feel free to put your questions in the chat, because I'm going to address them after the talk. Okay, so India, as you know, was a land of divided loyalties, right? So 1892, 1891, this is the time period when the events occurred. The original events actually occurred in 1891, April 25th. For the purposes of my book and to make the sequence of things happen, I actually changed a few things. Some of those are the dates. So I had the crime happen in October of 1891, and then the investigations happening in 1892. It just aligns with some of the other issues and things I was doing in the book. But I have taken a few liberties with history. Historical fiction is like that. So you did have large tracts of land under British rule, and most of you know this, but when I looked at the slide, it astonished me how large those tracts of land were. There were over 500 princely states. So all the bluish grayish area is area under princely states. And only the white pieces in this map were under direct British administration. So large pockets really had their own administrations. And of course, you had this very unsettled border. I don't know if you can see the cursor, but it's the top left of the map, the northwest frontier. So India and Pakistan were one country, obviously, at that time until partition, you know this. But what most people don't know is that border with Pakistan didn't exist until 1896. It's called the Durrant Line, and it's still contested. Afghanistan does not acknowledge it as an international border. So at that point, the great game was being played out with the British troops trying to occupy more territory or hold on to posts, supply posts, and so on. And a lot of Bombay boys in the army were often sent off there, and as well as to Rangoon to fight whatever local battles were going on, as the British administration tried to keep hold of geography. So these are unsettled times, and it's not recognized generally how prevalent these skirmishes they were. Until I went back to the National Archives, I didn't realize how many skirmishes had been going on in these border areas as well as in the north. So where did it begin for me, right? This is Rajabai Tower on the left. This is the Parsiana magazine cover from 2012 that I saved for some reason because of this charming picture. It's a portrait of unknown Parsi lady by Raja Ravi Verma. And then this is on the right-hand side, a picture of the original victims of this, this tragedy. Bacha on the left in the sari, he was 20 years old. and Pilu on the right was only 16 years old when they died. So this actual mimeograph is from that time. And why was it printed? You see the Rajabai Tower in the middle. It was printed because the case of that was held, the murder case actually, was settled in a very unsatisfactory way. And two petitions were put before the High Court to reopen the case. One person called Manikji Aslaji was tried for the crime, but there was really insufficient proof and he was let go. And the Parsi is extremely upset about it. A couple of newspapers wrote very, very dramatic and unhappy editorials and wanted the rule of law and order to work for them and wanted to have some closure in this case and why these girls died, like what happened. So two petitions were filed and this little mimeograph was created to generate support for signatures. So remember that the entire population of the Parsi community was roughly 100,000. It's slightly less, slightly more, depending upon what estimates you look at. And 60,000 people signed the one petition and 40,000 signatures were on the second. So Parsis were extremely unhappy when this happened. And what exactly happened? So the original case is you can look up on Google, Rajabai Tower tragedy, and many of you probably have and found the same articles I did. It just says that these two ladies left home in the middle of the day, told their mother, their parents, they were going to their aunt's house, didn't go to their aunt's house, went to the reading room, which was a common place to socialize. They climbed the tower and roughly around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, first one, then the other fell from that gallery up there. You know, it's a curved gallery right around the tower. So I went up. It's closed to the public, but I pleaded and asked for special permission. I went up there, and I will tell you that it's extremely claustrophobic to go up this tower. And when we got to the top, I was not allowed to go on the gallery. I could not go on the gallery. I had a lady policeman with me, a policewoman with me, and the door was locked. They did not give her the key. So I never got onto the gallery, but I did get into the tower. And I was fascinated by this case, right? So how does this happen? It turns out those two ladies, and I'll go back for a second, those two ladies were actually the wife and the sister of Ardeshir Godrej, who was at that time, he had not yet founded Godrej Enterprises. He was a 22-year-old law student. They'd only been married 1 year, and it's just such a tragedy. But then he went on to recover, right? He went on to recover. He went on to create 17 different businesses. And it just occurred to me, how does one recover from this? How does one get closure? And I wondered whether he had maybe hired a detective. So that's the beginning of the fiction. So far, up until this point, everything I had said has been narrated from the original events. So my fiction starts at this point where I said, all right, who would he hire if Adi, this young man, hires somebody? It's likely to be maybe a British retired officer, young veteran, maybe somebody who had been disenchanted with the army and wanted to leave. And I came up with this photograph. It's just from Pinterest. I don't know who he is, probably from the Second World War, but I've accumulated a host of photographs to represent the characters in my book. And I thought maybe he's going to be Anglo-Indian because something about that first scene where he meets Adi, it's chapter 2 in my book when you get to it, he's so deferential. And I thought an army officer, usually not deferential. Then I realized if he is Anglo-Indian and mixed race and has something of his own that he's worried about or unhappy about, then maybe that's what causes this dynamic to happen. So they became friends, right? In my book, I have a bromance going where they're just buddies. And that was part of what fueled the whole story. Of course, it changed. Stories have a habit of changing. So if he had been accepted by his father, right, his English father, then possibly he might have had a career like this gentleman, Charles McGregor, who was, it's written on Wikipedia, he's son of Major and an Indian woman. They don't give her name, right? But it was common at that time to, prior to the 1800s, it was very common. In the 1800s, started becoming less common to marry Indian women. But if he had been accepted, by his father, he might have had a glorious, illustrious career. As I have it, he is illegitimate, so he does not have the protection of that official name and must find his own way. So clubbability in the entire colonial experience, this is something that is uniquely British, trying to make a mini England wherever they go. And so essentially, this is a yacht club picture. If you are interested, there's a marvelous article from the 1990s and actually written up in the 2001 Gazette, which has a lot of information about clubbability. Samuel Johnson's supposed to have created that word. What it means is essentially areas that are English only. And Yacht Club, Bengal Club had these posters, no dogs or Indians allowed beyond this point. Abir Mukherjee's book actually has a marvelous description of these, how the interaction between the races might have occurred. So the Ripon Club was created. You guys probably have had a meal or two at the Ripon Club. It has a very old history, but it was created as a Parsi only institution at one point and then expanded for Indians only. It wasn't till much later that the Wellington Club was created, which allowed the races to mix. And being Anglo-Indian is kind of an awkward place to be because you're in between and not really English and not really Indian, and essentially a mixed breed, which would be the insult of the time and would have given him a lot of the character, a lot of grief. So by making one choice in the book really became a lot about race. I had intended it to be very much a feminist book, and it is, but there are undercurrents that are subconscious, and they do tend to filter out into writing. So some of the other characters, right? On the left is a picture of an unknown man from Pinterest, but that's what I thought Eddie might look like. And lo and behold, when I find his photograph, he's not that different. So here's a picture from the Godrej Foundation. It's a Wikipedia picture from one of his pages on Ardeshir Godrej. And yep, he's looked pretty similar to what I had imagined. And he was really quite fascinating. I read a couple of biographies of Ardeshir Godrej, and I was enormously, just had enormous admiration for this person. Here's a character on the left, again from Pinterest. Don't know who she is, but she represents Diana. I gave Ardeshir Godrej a sister. I know he had many siblings, but I don't know that he ever had a sibling called Diana. If there is a Godrej family member on the call, maybe they will let me know. But there was actually a Diana Framji in Simla, at least in 1920s and 30s. I helped with a biography of the time in Simla, 1930s. A gentleman asked me to help editing it, and it turned out that she actually did exist. So anyway, I represented this character with the picture on the left, and she is really an embodiment of some of the spunky women of the time. So here you have Cornelia Sorabji, India's first woman lawyer, although she didn't actually get to take the bar exam until later. I think the first lady was actually Mithan Tata Lam, who took the bar in the 1920s, although Cornelia Sorabji had studied law in Oxford in the 1890s. And I used a lot of Cornelia Sorabji's writings as primary research for the book. So of course, that adding in a spunky female character changes the character of the book. And I had a lot of fun with that. So what's happening at the time? Here are two pictures from the National Gallery in UK. And on the left, if you see that person in the turban, you would imagine he looks like a Punjabi guy, but he's actually English. He's Captain Digton Probyn. And then on the right-hand side, you see Thomas Cavanaugh. He's the guy in the middle that they are dressing. They're putting a turban on him. They're checking his beard because during the siege of Lucknow, he was an English officer who disguised himself to escape out of the fortress and bring aid to his beleaguered comrades. And this is happening during the 1857 Sepoy Mutiny. So why include these photographs? Because there is a bit of a history of people wandering around in disguise. And I found that fascinating. In my book, Captain Jim does tend to do this. Sherlock Holmes could wander around in disguise, so why not Captain Jim? He's also based on another character, Charles Forget. So if you are near Bhabha Hospital, and there's an Agyari there, and you go up Forget Street, you may think that this is actually named like misspelled Forget, Forget, but it is not misspelled. It is actually named after Charles Forget, who was a police inspector during the mutiny, during the Sepoy Mutiny of the time. And most people don't know that the mutineers were in various pockets of the country, but it had regiments in Kolhapur had mutinied, and that's very, very close to the city of Bombay. Remember, Bombay Presidency was much, much larger. So it's just a generic photograph painting here of the mutiny, but it occurred to me that this was also an interesting character, so I looked him up. Charles Forget had this habit as inspector of police of frequenting chai ka dukan or wherever, and in disguise and listening to conversations. And so he did supposedly uncover a plot in the Bombay Presidency, in the city of Bombay. And 6 people were arrested, 4 were shipped off to the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, and 2 were executed, and that mutiny did not happen in Bombay. So the citizens of Bombay were so grateful, they actually put together a reward of 16,000 rupees, which at that time was a fortune, and mostly funded by industrialists and business people and traders of Bombay city, because he had prevented the carnage that could have occurred. And so he took that money, he went off to England, he built a beautiful house, which is today an observatory and is open to the public. So other characters, oh my, I had such fun with these. So a photograph on the left is typical British officers in their red coats, red and white. Police were sourced from the military, but at least in Calcutta, they had white uniforms, different ranks had different color uniforms. Here you have Gurkhas. There's a couple of Gurkhas in my book. For a short people, the Nepalese really have left a long stamp on Indian culture and are really renowned in military terms. So I had to include them. It's a nice little section in the book when you get to it of how Captain Jim interacts with them. Of course, there are a few British officers, so the bottom left represents one of them. But the book then, in the middle of it, turns into a travelogue, because sometimes your book gets hijacked by your characters. And in my case, it definitely did. There are 2 adventures in the middle of the book that are a complete detour. And it's deliberate because the book is about India. India is such a huge character in the book that you can't just have a mystery and forget the main character. So Captain Jim wanders around India looking for clues and comes across various people. He gets derailed like we do in our lives. So here's a bunch of kids. Of course, these are Brahmin kids with their traditional, little dhotis. But he comes across urchins. I just like the way that these guys are so cheerful and having such a lot of fun in the picture. He dresses up, in various disguises, but he gets stuck in the middle of somewhat of a civil war where there's a skirmish going on, and a bunch of refugees, And so these are photographs from the time. When I put these photographs up for an American audience, people keep asking me to come back to this picture because they cannot believe sometimes, what poverty really looks like. And these are refugees in the middle, very unhappy looking gentlemen sitting there, barely clothed, but it's what people dress like, especially if you've been disrupted. And then right against them, I put these back to back for a reason. You have the Nawabs and the kings and the Rajas and so on. Some were good, some were horrible. And I do have them represented here on the top right. And there are women in the story, right? So there's a Rani in the story. There's Chutki, this bottom right is a picture. I thought what she might look like. She has a strange look in her face, a sort of watchful look. And she is quite an interesting character, a minor character, and many people have emailed me to tell me she's their favorite character. But you have to read more about her. A little bit of a tragic character, but it was charming. So moving fairly quickly, because I know we are trying to keep on time here, and I do have about a few slides of a quiz at the end. So I'm going to save time for that. This is a street scene in Lahore. Beautiful, painting. Most people get taken by the foreground. There's this person with a marvelous beard that has been drawn. But what I get fascinated with is the beggar in the middle and the shine that the painter has put so much attention on his clothing. And he's just sitting there in the middle of the painting. Almost, unseen. He's right in the middle, but he's almost unseen. People who grew up in Lahore have told me that when they read that street scene I have in my book, that they can smell the bazaar, and that's a high compliment. Here's a couple more pictures of locations in the book. There's an Anarkali street in Lahore. It's just a picture that I picked up from Pinterest, but it represents some of the travels of Captain Jim. And then this picture on the right is actually Lohargarh Fort, which is near Pune. I have a spooky adventure where Captain Jim is sort of wandering around a little bit near Pathankot, but this picture better represented some of the geography that he's going to have to cover. And yeah, here are pictures of this one on the right is an actual photograph from 1866. These are Afridi tribesmen with their long rifles. You see all the bundled up clothing, the turbans, the belts on over their shoulders carrying munitions. And then this on the left is another picture from the National Army Museum of a Pathan Sawar. So Sepoy on horseback as a Sawar. And I imagine that Captain Jim would have disguised himself something like that when he went up in Pathankot on his adventures. So there's, these rural scenes. There's also these marvelous society ballrooms that Captain Jim gets to venture into, because really there are two Indias. There's the polite society, and then there's the real, regular people India. And he has the ability to wander into both in order to solve the mystery. Gorgeous chandelier, just enormous two chandeliers there. But I also noticed that above the doorway, there are these photographs, these big portraits. And of course, this is some sort of dining room now, but just the construction of it, the architecture, the pillars, the marvelous ceiling, just all riveting. And a lot of these pictures are from the princely states. I think the left might be Mysore Palace. The right is the throne room of the Nizam of Hyderabad. If you step up these stairs, I imagine that the throne would be somewhere up there. And some of these are open to the public. I visited Mysore and a few other places, and before the lockdown, got some pictures. So I'm going to really, leave this as a teaser and then go into the quiz at this point. We're about halfway into the talk. So the task for Captain Jim is catch the killers and come home, right? It's pretty early in the book that he realizes who the miscreants are, but then catching them is a whole different story. So a traditional mystery, an Agatha Christie, you only find out who did it on the second last page, right? Not my book. You find out pretty early, but then catching them is a whole different story. So Captain Jim gets personally invested. He takes on greater and greater risk. And at some point you will realize why he's doing all this. And part of it is his own backstory, where, you know, he has something that he wants to atone for, but then part of it is looking forward because there's someone he's trying to impress. So I tell my friends that my novel is full of surprises, action-packed adventure. It's a love story. It's an epic. It's a nostalgic tale of Bombay. So many people write to me on my email address, which is on my website. And, you know, they tell me that it is pure nostalgia for them. But it's nostalgia for a place, but also for a time. In fact, the story I wrote is a mystery, but I'm told it transcends its genre. It's bigger. It is much bigger. So let's move into the quiz portion here. One last thing. This photograph on the left is what I imagined Framji Mansion to look like. Framji Mansion is the residence of the client. It turns out to be fairly pivotal to the book, but it's actually based on Dangor Bungalow, which was in Bandra. It has now been demolished. And it's where I used to go for piano lessons when I was a kid. And the structure of the house always impressed me so much. So I couldn't find a picture of it, but this is as close as I could get. And it's a charming location. So let's move into the quiz area, because Dangor Bungalow was demolished and so many of these beautiful bungalows are no more. But you know, some history remains, a lot of history remains, and I fervently support Khaki Tour's ambition to try and preserve some of it. So we're going to go into a few pictures. You're all familiar with the new sea link. And of course, Bombay has become such a modern city now, Mumbai. But there are still beautiful. So the mystery was just what happened to these women. And it has remained an unsolved mystery to date. In fact, there was a lot that went wrong with the case, okay? So there were people at the top of that gallery, we're talking about real incident actually, who were not questioned, who were not brought into the trial. There was a lot of bungling of the actual investigation. I have the police inspector as McIntyre. The actual guy was McGregor or somebody like that was his name. And unfortunately, his entire case was McDermott was his name. It was derailed, right? He was accused of accepting a bribe of rupees 5,000. The driver of a Victoria sort of testified against him. But then 2 years later, this Dunsing, whoever it was, admitted to lying about the bribery conversation in the Victoria. So a lot of nonsense. There were people that you know, came out of the woodwork to claim that the girls had been accosted and had jumped to escape from rape, essentially. And again, nothing could be substantiated. Who, you know, there were no witnesses. However, this article I have here is by Aditi Sen, who's a historian. She wrote to me, and her article, which is public, says several other important witnesses who were not cross-examined included some Mullah Bhoi, Manik Bhoi, Sayed Lal, Prabha Shankar, who were at the top of the tower right after the women had fallen. Wow. They were there and they were not cross-questioned. Okay, that's called bungling the case. So why wouldn't it be suicide, right? Three reasons why it could not have been suicide. Or I don't think it could have been suicide. some things were missing from the women. The lady in the middle here is not wearing a matubanu, but typically the sari would have been pinned to a head covering. She's wearing here on the right-hand side, both the women are wearing a matubanu. That's a scarf that ties tight around the head, and then the sari is pinned to that scarf. Well, one of those was missing. The matubanu was missing. It was never found. Her kasti, her sacred thread, was never found. Her spectacles, she's wearing spectacles here, those were never found. So clearly, something has gone awry. You can say, all right, maybe she didn't wear a matubanu that day. Maybe she left her kasti at home. If they were planning to commit suicide, I can imagine her leaving, not wearing her sacred thread, which Parsis wear every day. But maybe something had gone wrong. They planned to commit suicide. She might leave the kasti at home. But her glasses? Her glasses? How would she cross the road without her glasses? So something clearly, is wrong there. There are reports where one shoe was found at the top of the tower and the other shoe was down with the bodies. So there are a lot of reasons why this is unlikely to have been suicide. Fact is, we won't know. We will never know definitively what went wrong because there were no witnesses and there was no concrete investigation to uncover the facts of the case. So it's been left as an unsolved mystery for 130 years. And that's sort of why it stayed in our memory, right? Our collective memory. When I was a teenager and I wanted to do something, dangerous or adventurous or go into areas that my parents didn't like, I would be told, remember the Godrej girls. Okay, you're not safe even in daylight. So the code word was remember the Godrej girls. And I thought, well, it's just something that's just happened like 10 years ago. Even at that time, I'm talking about the 1980s, it had happened 90 years ago, but the community never forgot. So it stayed in our consciousness as a wound, as a tragedy, that these girls were lost and there was no justice, apparently. We don't know what happened to them. So sorry if I have burst your bubble, but the true facts of the case are that this will remain an unsolved mystery. Now, I have a fictionalized version, which I'm not going to tell you. You have to read the book. Okay, other questions, Farooq?
So my question essentially is, was it this personal experience? Like you said that even in the 1980s, this was something that people were speaking about. Mm-hmm. What prompted you to then go back to this story when you were writing this book?
Excellent question. Yeah. So I read an article, this article actually, by Aditi Sen. It was republished in 2016 and then 2017. Parsi Khabar is a newsletter, online website. They reprinted it, it's the same article, right? About the mystery of the clock tower deaths. And I remembered that, oh, this is the same one. And then I started to read about it and realized that, oh my gosh, this is actually that old. It's not, something that had just happened when I was growing up. It's something that had happened in 1890s. So I got fascinated by the mystery and started to research it. And it had gotten to be the trial of the century, 1800s. It was written about in all the Indian newspapers, the Parsi newspapers, even in England. It was discussed in Parliament. Of course, they have massacred the names. They misspelled all the names in the records, but you can figure out that this is the same thing. And they usually called it the Rajabai Tower case or the Rajabai Tower tragedy. So I did a lot of research to realize, oh my gosh, this has never been solved. Nobody has actually figured it out. But I went back to what was happening in India at the time. The Sepoy Mutiny had just happened. It was just 30 years after that. People weren't, entirely comfortable or settled into, the British Raj, as you call it. There were simmering resentments in an undercurrents constantly, and people, even those who were doing well, would have had a lot of divided loyalties. To should I continue to support, this pattern because I'm making money out of it. I have to survive, I have to make an income, but at the same time, there were a lot of negative things that were going on, and racism is only one of them. It's a huge thing, but there was tons of other things that were going on that people weren't happy about at the time. So later on, of course, you have the Rowlatt Acts and so on, but those are covered much better in Abir Mukherjee's book, and then Sujata Massey's books do a marvelous job. Mine book is a little bit pre-independence, before really the surge for independence. So it does not cover too much politics other than this divided loyalties, the sense of divided loyalties. Go ahead.
So you mentioned, if we were to categorize your book, we would categorize it as historical fiction.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So recently, of course, you have so many popular shows like perhaps The Crown, where there's been a lot of discussion as to how much liberty an author should take with history when they're working on a work of fiction.
Yes.
What's your take on that? How much? What thought process went into your book? Is the story in your book something that you would have liked a turn that you would have liked the case to take, or how did you go about it? Maintaining the essence of the story while still making it a work of fiction.
Yeah, so the facts of the original case are a jumping off point for me. I essentially came up with a version of events that explained the facts, but also explained the time period. So there's a reason why you write historical fiction in a particular time period. Like this story could not have occurred at any other time period. And it's because it was just 30 years after the mutiny and before, Gandhi came back from South Africa. I think in 1893, he actually left for South Africa and came back in the 1900s. He was in South Africa for 20 years, 2 decades. So this is before all of that. But I think I took some liberties. I definitely did take some liberties, particularly with events in North India. So if you look at the back of my book, I have a little bit of a mea culpa listed there, where I talk about the liberties I took with actual events. And some of these are warranted because all the events are based on things that really happened. For example, there's no record of Lahore being burned by Afghan tribes in 1892, but in September 1897, you have the Battle of Saragari, which pretty much mimics one of the skirmishes that I describe in the book. Similarly, I've described events in Karachi that did not occur in reality, but again, there's a big but. Records of Victoria Cross and Indian Medal of Honor recipients describe several skirmishes between tribesmen and British Indian soldiers between 1880 and 1919. That's between the Second and the Third Anglo-Afghan Wars. Who are fighting these wars? It's our soldiers. It's Bombay boys who are up there fighting these wars for the Brits, right? You have to remember that this period of time was extremely unsettled. And it's a fascinating time to write in because so many things happen that are not taught in history books. You have to go poking around in the descriptions of people who won the Victoria Cross. For example, if you're white, you got the Victoria Cross. You had to have lived and survived to get the Victoria Cross. And if you're Indian, you got the Medal of Honor, and Indian Order of Merit, pardon me. And again, those stories are fascinating because they tell you what really happened. They are in the records. So for lack of a better answer, I'm just going to say I use a lot of real history, but I have moved it around. And yeah, it's fiction, so I'm allowed. I make it very, very clear that it is fiction. It is a fictionalized version of events.
So I have two questions, one based on the fact and one based on your book.
Okay.
Make that three. Question one is, why did the girls even go to Rajabai Tower that day? Question two is, was there ever a suspect who could not be pursued because of lack of evidence?
Marvelous.
And
Uh,
question three
oh,
is,
yeah.
the culprit in your book, is it your personal opinion that he or she might have been the actual culprit?
Yeah. I'm not going to do too many spoilers. You have to read the book for it. But I will answer some of those. So why did they go to the Rajabai Tower? It was a common meeting place. The reading room was a public space. It's a library. So it was a place where young people would meet and talk. You had newspapers that were publicly available. And, it was a place for educated young people to meet. So I can understand them going to meet friends at the reading room. Why did they go up to the top of the tower? Again, that was a spot to get a breeze. It was very hot, April. And if you go up, I went up in May. It was horrible inside the tower, stultifying. I'm actually claustrophobic, and it was 100 degrees in the shade. But when you get to the top, there's supposed to be a nice breeze, so and a beautiful view. So again, that's a place where you might have, a romantic tryst with somebody, because again, you're close enough to people in the reading room, but you have privacy up there. It's unclear why they went up, but the fact that they went up, two of them went up. They didn't go just one woman, right? If you're going to meet a lover, you're going to go alone, but two of them went. This is something that the two sisters-in-law were okay with. And I don't believe the suicide story. That's the general convention, is that, yeah, they had something going on and they committed suicide. These are girls from a wealthy family, okay? They were protected, they were corseted. If you look at their clothing, everything that they needed, physically would have been provided. Yeah, women were restricted, enormously restricted. But I don't see that is a good reason. There's someone has come up with this story that they were lesbian lovers, and like, come on. In the 1800s, homosexuality was taboo, and a respectable girl would never have dreamed of conducting herself in that manner. Now, it was shunned. I mean, it was appalling. So people who were brought up very traditionally, extremely unlikely that both of them, right, the two of them could have been lesbians. One, perhaps, yeah, maybe, there's a possibility, but both in the same family, impossible. So that's, where I go with that story. It's all very well to sensationalize things now, because homosexuality is okay. Gay people are fine. But, to think of somebody who's brought up in a very traditional way, feeling like that, and me feeling that it's okay to go ahead and conduct a liaison in that fashion, it's impossible. So that puts paid to that theory. I went through many theories, the lover theory, the lesbian lover theory, the suicide theory. And where I landed up was actually, it's based upon a family history. So in my family, I found this book, and it is a manuscript. This was printed in 1950, but it is a Gujarati manuscript that our family could not read. And the reason is that it is an eyewitness testimony by my grandmother's grandfather of the mutiny itself. He was in the army, in the British Army. He was a mess man. So he would make food for two companies of soldiers. And he was an eyewitness to what happened after the mutiny, the slaughter that happened. Now, our family had this document, but during the British Raj, it would have been very dangerous if we had printed it or published it, because it contradicted the official events. And I've become the family historian, so people give me things, and I have two copies of this book. The only two copies in existence are both with me, and I couldn't read it. I can read Gujarati, but I couldn't read this ancient stuff. It's 150 years old. So I had it translated, And that's when I realized, oh my goodness, if this had come out, it's like a bomb. This would have been an unexploded bomb. It could have ruined my family if it had come out 100 years ago. So maybe the girls were protecting something else. Maybe this wasn't about suicide. This wasn't about sex. This wasn't, maybe there's something more to it. And maybe we underestimate women all the time. And maybe they were actually trying to protect their family in some way. So I won't say any more than that. I'm giving you more spoilers than I should. But
no problem.
yeah,
But
you'll
staying
enjoy
on
it.
the social side of things, staying with the social side of things, after this incident had happened, did it in any way, even if for a short time, affect the social freedoms that Parsi women had? Is one of the questions that Aronian posed.
Yeah, it affected in a
Did it
permanent
instill
way,
some sort of
right?
fear in the community and allowing women to be as free as they were?
I'm telling you, like 90 years later, we were still restricting young women, right? And for our own safety. I was being restricted as a teenager, but to keep me alive, right? To keep me safe. So yeah, did it have an impact? It had a permanent impact. And even today, if young families don't even remember the Godrej girls, there is a undercurrent that they remember from their childhoods. And so, yeah, there was a permanent impact from these events on our community, but on many communities. So there's this illusion of wealth, right? This idea that if you're wealthy, you have to be safe, or you have so many, whatever, security guards, or you have, big staff in the house. How can you be unsafe? Well, women have been unsafe in India for generations, for decades, for centuries. If you really want to give yourself nightmares, read this article. It's actually a report called Slavery in Bengal, 1770 to 1880. It is, something you have to, I think, belong to a library or university to access it. It's on JSTOR, JSTOR. Oh my gosh. Institutionalized sex traffic in India in that century. So India has been unsafe for women for decades and for a very long time. And yet this situation that you could be unsafe in daylight in a busy university, this shocked the community, shocked everyone. So yeah, it had a permanent impact.
So your book, I guess, apart from, sorry, go ahead.
No, that's all right. So that's okay. I'll just say one thing. I skipped over the other two questions, which is the suspect and the culprit. Was there a suspect that they did not question? There were 3 suspects, okay, that they didn't question. And it's public information. It's in this article. Their names are given. How can you not have investigated this? But there was so much nonsense going on in the events. There's a lot of red herrings. McDermott was completely derailed. He was in 15 different directions. There was a lot of nonsense, and it has been debunked since then. But so there were 3 suspects. Was there a culprit that I feel was not named or did not feature in the original case? Yes, I do think so. I think to do something like this, you have to have incredible arrogance. And that's sort of where my book goes, is who could be so privileged to have the arrogance of attempting something like this in broad daylight, right? Thinking that they're untouchable. So, today it would be some major politician's progeny might feel so untouchable that I can get away with anything. At that time, you had a different category of people who were so arrogant as to assume that they could get away with anything. And so that's the the direction my book goes. Very early on, it goes in that direction. And then the question is, how do you bring somebody like that to account? How do you arrest them? How do you catch them? So that's the short story. You were saying although something.
Yeah, not although. So I think to sum it up, then your book does capture a lot of the social context in Bombay of that time also, along with the actual fictionalizing of the crime.
Yeah, the clubbability aspect is one, but there are many subcultures within India, even today. But there's more mixing of the cultures today than there was at that time. For example, I talk about many different communities, and I try to represent them in a fair way without bad mouthing any one community and making them the scapegoat, because there's good and bad in every community, every single community. So I did try to, in the space of one little book, represent the vast array of subcultures within India. You know, the British left us one unhappy legacy, and that is calling us by the name of our community. The Parsis, the Hindus, the Brahmins, the Muslims, even more granular than that. And that's an unhappy way that we have of labeling people. But the fact is that each group does have its own internal structures, internal norms. And so I've tried to lay out some of these, mostly focused on my own community, the Parsis. And it's generally a loving portrayal of the Parsis, but it's an honest mirror. I do hold up a mirror to show what I think is flat out wrong in the community.
And we have a small question. Somebody has read your book, and they're not giving away spoilers, but they refer to one fact that you say the chime of the Rajabai Tower could be heard as far as Malabar Hill. Is that true?
At that time, I think so. At that time, because if you look at the old portraits, old pictures even, you can see the rise of the Malabar Hill in the same photograph as the Rajabai Tower. So why was the tower built, right? It was built because people didn't have watches. And India was moving from a sleepy rural environment to a very bustling capital. Mumbai was at least the commercial heart, if not the political heart of India. It was most certainly the commercial hub of India, of the entire empire, I would say. So yeah, time mattered. If you were going to meet at a certain time, you had to be there at a certain time, but you didn't have a watch. So frequently people needed these clock towers and so on. Actually, it was built by Premchand Roychand, and the romantic story is that he funded this tower in the university because his mother was blind and could not see the clock in the house. So she would hear the chimes and then know when to pray or when to eat. Well, come on, if Premchand Roychand had the money to build this whole tower, he had money to have servants that would tell her the time. So I think that's a romantic story, but it is, and the fact that it was chiming on the quarter hour meant it was really about keeping people on schedule and helping people. It had different sounds, the different chimes to tell you, is it the quarter hour, the half hour, the 3/4 hour? So I do think it would be visible, audible into a very wide radius at that time. If you remember, you only had bullock carts, you had carriages. This is before cars, before buses, before any form of, motor. You had trains about, that's all you had. Trains and horses.
All right. So I think, one more. It's a fact, actually, more than a question. We have an attendee here whose cousin's neighbor is married in the family that built the Rajabai Tower.
Haha. Marvelous.
A question from Farooq. What impact did the crime have on the judicial system at that time? Were there any learnings? Did investigations become more thorough afterwards?
So there's a lot of change, right, that happens after this, but I don't know that I can attribute it directly to this crime. Certainly there were restructurings, the police force, there was, if you read some of the reports, there is a pretty good Indian National Archive. You have to actually ask for some of the documents to be digitized for you. But there were a number of changes that happened after that. I don't know that I can attribute them directly to this case, though. There's no known record of that. But in the decade to follow, there were a number of reforms, let's just say. I don't know about the entire judicial system. That might be, scope for a different topic. I know Purvin Mysteries by Sujata Massey. She has a whole series, and she tends to focus on judicial history with her character and with her stories. The first one is The Widows of Malabar Hill. The second one is Satapur Moonstone. And the third one coming out in June, the book is called The Bombay Prince. And she does focus a little bit more on the judicial side. It's quite interesting. Her characters also come across things like this that are situations in the common, in our common history, but then they the books give a different slant to them.
And beyond the story, quite a few of our attendees today are very intrigued about your family's account of the mutiny. So the book that you showed us.
Right.
People are wondering whether you plan to publish that soon as well.
I didn't think anyone would be interested. It's an autobiography of a very simple man who was thrown out of his house when he was 14 years old, and he's a self-made man. He became a chai wala boy for the British Army, and they taught him English. He learned to write English, and that he ended up becoming a pain in the butt for them, because he would write petitions for people, illiterate people, in English and represent them, even though he was not a lawyer. But he ended up being employed by the British Army for many years. He has had an eventful life, ups and downs, a little bit of a kopri, if you know what that means, mad baba, pretty much. But I'm immensely proud of him, firstly, for an illiterate person to have written a poem, an autobiographical poem that is in iambic pentameter with the rhythm and the rhyme of the time, idioms, lots of idioms. So it's a marvelous piece of work, but then it's also incredibly honest. He talks about stupid things he did and how he fought with people that he shouldn't have and ruined his own chances. And then he was a dumb youth, and he admits it. And then he did some enormously kind things in his life. So like I say, a little bit of kopri. But I don't know that anyone would want to read the actual translation unless I can find a way of putting that into poetry. The Gujarati is archaic. It's unreadable. I can't understand half of it. I had to find a very special person to decode it for me. And she actually lived in Australia. So I used it in my story, but I don't have any plans to publish it. If someone's interested, they could certainly contact me.
So we have an instance that one of our attendees has mentioned of another book called Maza Pravas by Vishnu Bhatt. Similar story of a common man in the mutiny that was published only recently. So
Okay.
We have a lot of people over here who would definitely be interested in this account should you ever decide to.
Wow. Okay. Interesting.
Another question that's come in is, while you were researching this book, did you get the chance to interact with the descendants of these unfortunate people?
I have not. A friend of mine knows one of the Godrej families, but I have not. In fact, I have not used the Godrej name at all in the book. Nowhere in the book are they named. I have a fictional Framji family. Framji is a very common Parsi name. And curiously, Framjis did actually live in Simla, at least in the 1930s. So I have different locations in the book, and Simla is one of them. But I did not actually interact with the Godrej family directly. I'd love to hear what they think about it. I think I've shown the Framjis in a fairly positive light, but it would be kind of cool.
So I think we've reached the end of all the questions.
Okay.
Is there anything else from the book that you would like to share with us without giving away any spoilers?
No, I think, if you'd like to read it, certainly pick it up. There is an Indian version coming out at the end of the month. It's paperback, so certainly should be accessible. I didn't intend this to be too much of a book promotion event. It's a fun read, but I will tell you very honestly, it's not a 2-day read. Okay, take your time with it. Enjoy it. I had so much fun writing it and writing the descriptions, and it's meant to be read aloud. So if you're too busy to read, maybe, buy an audiobook, stick a, earphone in your ear and enjoy it being read. The reading is done by Vikas Adam. His mother was Parsi. And I say that only because he asked me, well, what does so-and-so sound like? And what does Barger sound like? And I said, well, you remember your grandfather? That's what Barger sounds like. Because his own mom is Parsi. He actually won an audiophile award for his narration. There are 20 characters and he did the voice for all of them. The women, the men, the kids, the old people, the babies. Incredible feat to be able to produce all those voices. Incredible work. And he really has done a wonderful job reading it out aloud. So it is meant, the book is meant to be read aloud. It's written in a way that is meant to be read aloud. So enjoy it.
And apart from the main characters in the story, is there any smaller character in the book, perhaps, whom you're very attached to? If you can tell us about it.
Yeah, well, Adi is a character I'm extremely attached to. The main character is Captain Jim. There's no question about it. But Diana, so Diana is very interesting. She did not get her say because it's all from, the entire book is written in the first person point of view of a 30-year-old male. Okay, so initially when the book was out, my advanced readers got a copy. They didn't see my face. They thought the whole book was written by a man. Right, so it is first person point of view from a soldier's perspective. But Diana is a pivotal character. She has love interest. There's a love story, so she's the love interest of the book. But she didn't get her say. So the second book that I'm writing is very likely, it does have a lot of Diana in it, because I felt like she didn't really get enough, real estate in the first book.
And when can we expect that one?
Sorry,
when
go ahead.
Can we expect that one to be released?
Yeah, fingers crossed, early next year with luck.
Yeah,
it's luck. There's a long. I'm learning a lot about publishing. This is my first book. Publishing with a big publisher is very complex. It has multiple parts to it, and it's a difficult business. So there's about a year and a half lead time from the time that they accept the book to the time it actually comes out. This one I'm hoping will have about a year lead time. So if I get it accepted by say May, then it should come out, by April or May next year.
All right, thank you so much. We are over time, so I won't take up too much of your time as well. Okay. Thank you so much for taking us through the book and the actual incident. That was really a very unique talk.
You're very welcome. I mean, there's so much to talk about, right? This is the difficulty with this. I had intended to give you guys a little bit of quiz, but you know what? These are monuments that you can see. I guess I'll just leave you with the one last thought. Mm-hmm. The rest of us who are not in Mumbai are stuck with photographs that are out there on the web and videos that people have taken and are on YouTube. You folks are walking through the city all the time. So I would just ask that once in a while, get out of the traffic and look up. Look at what you are given, because there are marvelous locations, buildings, institutions that are all around you.
Thank you. And actually, that's what we try to do in Khaki as well, encourage people to look up and see what they miss on an everyday basis.
Wonderful.
And